the story of this pandemic is told, Seattle, we will be remembered as the city that led the nation and got it right. Because of our innovation, compassion, and determination. Because we care for each other and the city that we love. Together, we won't just make it through, we'll come back stronger, better, and more just.
And that's Mayor Jenny Durkin wrapping up a short but sweet press conference about her budget proposal for next year. She's talking about getting through the COVID pandemic, talking about many other investments too. So put on your scuba mask and grab that air tank. We're taking a deep dive on the budget process. That's coming your way. We're also going to talk about the Shama Sawant recall. It's coming to the ballot, folks. A whole lot to talk about here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And I'm with Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight, who has read all 768 pages of the mayor's budget proposal, and somehow his brain has not exploded. Kevin, how you doing, man?
Well, I have to say that is a lie.
Yeah.
There are a few sort of obscure budget funds that I have not fully explored yet. But
all right. But
I've torn through a lot of it.
It sounds good. Well, thank you, sir, as always, for the depth of detail there. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Excited to see them back open at City Hall here in the first week of October. Please do support them and other small businesses too. Thanks also to our show patrons. Jason and Andy just joined us over the past week, pledging at the $10 level. Thanks, guys. Very much appreciate it. That means they are in the mug club. So we're going to send them one of these coveted Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mugs. Very hopeful that we will see their mugshot on our show soon, because our mugshot of the week this week, a beautiful photo from Zach down at Myrtle Edwards Park. A great look out at Elliott Bay. Beautiful skies above. Zach, thank you so much for sending that in, and thank you for your support. You can tell that photo was taken a little while ago because the sun is out, and oh, how I miss it so. We'll probably see it again mid-April, but we'll see how that goes. So please do join us. Support local journalism. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Thank you for your support. Also, thanks to Converge Media. Converge airs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get going with Right Here, Right Now. So before we go into our deep dive on the budget, I want to make sure we get through a few headlines about what the Seattle City Council is up to in this first full week of October. And Kevin, this move by the City Council to rename single-family housing as neighborhood residential zoning. We've talked about this before. The council is going to approve it this week. I wanted to make sure we touched on this again because this is a lot bigger than a naming process, and I think it really has a bearing on our city elections right now. This issue of urban growth, I'm hearing all the candidates for city council talk about it, the mayoral candidates too. This is a bigger deal than just a name change for sure.
Yeah, it is. And let's be clear about what this is. We've got a major update to the city's comprehensive plan coming in 2024.
Right. Process,
they're starting. Yep. It takes about 2 years to get through all of it, so they're going to start in earnest next year on that. And there is going to be a push to upzone all the single-family residential zoning across the city to allow for, at the very least, what they call missing middle housing. So duplexes, triplexes, small apartment complexes, so that we can increase housing, the amount of housing, because we need to build a ton of housing in the city. So we can increase it across the city and not just in small little pockets around the city.
Right.
And so this renaming is sort of the first front in that battle, because there will be a fair amount of opposition to it. Just by saying, okay, let's get past these single family zoning name and all that. But whether this ultimately passes, the rezoning in 2024, will depend an enormous amount on what happens in the 2023 district-based city council elections.
Yeah. Right. We'll keep an eye on that one, but interesting to see what the council is doing there too. I wanted to talk about another land use issue the council is going to be approving this week, Kevin, an expansion, if you will, of the Transfer of Development Rights program in the city of Seattle. So TDR, as it's called, allows a developer downtown or say South Lake Union to get extra floor area by purchasing development rights from farmland or forest land in King County. This new ordinance that the council is working on would expand the geographic area where those rights can be purchased from into Snohomish or Pierce County. So Kevin, in looking at this, I think the idea is to make it easier to find this TDR kind of land because it sounds like this program has almost been too successful in King County. They're they're buying up a lot of land in these areas.
Yeah, so there's another aspect of this program too, which is even within the city of Seattle,
Right.
TDR transfer has been used to protect historical sites.
Right. Okay.
So rather than tear down a historical site and build a much larger building on that, a developer can buy the site and then transfer the extra development capacity they would have on that site where the historical site lives, and move that to another site and get more floor area, more ability to build on that other site. So sort of it's a twofer. We still get more housing and more density, but we can preserve sites that are important, whether it's historical site or whether it's ecologically important site or farmland, right? Preserving rural lands is important. So there's been an agreement in the books already to be able to transfer development rights from, as you were mentioning, the rest of King County into Seattle.
Right.
And King County has an agreement with Pierce and Snohomish counties.
Yes.
And this would just extend that into the city of Seattle itself.
Right.
Because, to be honest, we're talking about regional issues here.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
Climate change and ecological, protection doesn't respect county borders.
Yeah.
Right?
So you have to be smart about that and just make it easier for these developers to get this land and have it over a wider area is what we're looking at.
Right.
I wonder about this. Is it going to have some impact on development? I guess the bottom line I saw from this was that there are a lot of developers out there that are eager to make these TDR transfers happen. So they almost needed to expand this geographical area just to make sure there were enough lands out there for people to go around and find them.
Yeah, we'll see. Construction in Seattle has really shifted a lot over the last several years, right?
Yeah.
So the residential construction is fairly steady. It went down a little bit during the pandemic recession, but it's been fairly steady. Commercial construction has absolutely tanked in Seattle. And will this help to bring it back? Do we need to bring it back? I don't know. And one of the things when I talk to City Hall about this, they say that the number of buildable sites that haven't already been sort of rebuilt in the downtown core are starting to get few and far between.
Yeah.
Right. So, there was just recently a bill passed by the city council that changes the rules for what can be built, the development standards for small lots in Belltown. Right. Because it was just some of the very small sort of ground footprint sites were because of setbacks and because of all the construction standards for them, it was just too hard to get a project that pencils out on paper. Right. And so they said, we can reduce setbacks. We can make some changes to the construction standards to allow for modular construction, so they can do it cheaper, do a lot of it off-site, and then just haul them in, and sort of, assemble the pieces together.
Sure. Right.
So there are these different kinds of efforts to try to figure out how we take most advantage of it. But we have other urban centers. Northgate is an urban center now. We're seeing a ton of building there.
There are a couple of
There's been a lot of building in Ballard. We'll see what happens with that over time, because there's certainly going to be some resistance to that spreading out too far as well.
Yeah.
But we do have other urban centers outside of the downtown core, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them.
Great points all there. Well, thank you for that, Kevin. I want to talk about what's up next, the Shama Sawant recall election. It is happening, people. That story is ahead on. Now hear this. Well, some big news last week from King County elections. The petition to recall Seattle City Councilmember Kshama Sawant has enough signatures to be certified and on the ballot. This is after a year's worth of battles in court and press conferences from Shama Sawant herself. Here's what she was saying about this recall effort back in October of last year, when she said big businesses want a do-over of the 2019 election.
But it is not about me. What they want to get rid of is socialist politics in City Hall. They want to get rid of every single reform that we have won.
Kevin, let's talk about nuts and bolts first. This is a vote only for District 3 residents we're going to be talking about. It's happening on December 7th. The date of the election has been a point of contention. I wanted to talk about this. The Shama Solidarity Campaign says the recall campaign delayed this so it wouldn't make the November ballot, and they're calling it a voter suppression tactic. Your thoughts on that to start, please?
Well, it's not a voter suppression tactic, and to be quite honest, it's not like the Tax Amazon campaign run by Sawant last, a couple winters ago, wasn't trying to work their own ballot initiative to, hit the timing for the election
Sure.
election
They
that they wanted.
Yes.
And so, this is something that campaigns do. The campaigns time, their initiatives to try to hit the ballot they think is going to be most advantageous to them. That doesn't mean you can't criticize them for doing that. In this case, calling it voter suppression, particularly with the way we run elections now, where everybody gets a mail-in ballot. They get it to their home, they can fill it out and send it in. It's really hard to argue that this is voter suppression, right? It certainly doesn't turn out the way that Sawant wouldn't, but
right. It didn't make the November ballot, so maybe not as many younger voters are going to show up, I guess is the case.
Or maybe as a percentage, there may be more.
Yeah, you never know. Right. It will be interesting to see what happens there in December with this getting out the vote, if you will. And I wanted to talk about the different campaigns and the dollars and cents, because I know you've tracked this for a long time on Seattle City Council Insight. I just checked some of the numbers. It looks like there are $624,000 now raised for the recall campaign, $687,000 raised for the Shama Solidarity campaign, well over $1 million. We're talking about $1.3 million at this point between those two campaigns. And now we have that date for the election. So I'm wondering if those amounts might go up even further with that news.
They're certainly going to go
about
up.
That. Yeah.
Well, and I'm on the mailing list for both campaigns, so I get to see what both of them are putting out. Sawant's campaign has been sending out at least 2 fundraising emails a week.
Yes.
Sometimes more. The recall campaign has sent out fewer over the last few weeks. I don't know if they were just busy with other stuff or what, but they've sent out fewer. I would certainly expect that will ramp up. It was interesting that Sawant side has been, they sent out one basically criticizing the recall campaign, saying that they're losing momentum because they haven't been fundraising as much. I really thought at the end of the day it was about votes and not the amount of money that you raise. But and now that the thing is on the ballot, I'm sure we're going to see a lot more from both sides.
And in terms of where the money's coming from, looking at these numbers recently, it looks like the trends that were in place a couple months ago are really playing out. In looking at the recall campaign, 17% of it's coming from outside district limits, but 40% of it is coming inside District 3. It's basically the reverse when you talk about the Shama Solidarity campaign. 56% outside city limits, 21% in District 3. It looks like this trend that you reported on several months ago, Kevin, is continuing to play out.
Yeah. When you look at the overall number of contributors, the Sawant Solidarity campaign has been picking up more. So it now has considerably more contributors than the recall campaign does. But there really is this very different split because the Sawant Solidarity campaign has been leaning very heavily on Socialist Alternative and their fundraising network, right? So they've been heavily fundraising in cities where Socialist Alternative has deep roots. Philadelphia, Minneapolis, San Francisco, places like that. They've been fundraising very hard and collecting. They keep going back to those same wells for that. And one can imagine they'll continue to get some more money from those places. Right? But a lot of that money is outside of District 3, let alone and outside of the city, right?
Yes, right.
Whereas the recall campaign, it's got a larger chunk of money coming in from District 3, and certainly a much larger coming in from the city as a whole.
Yeah. All those different districts are chipping in on that one, at least from what I've seen on those reports from Seattle Ethics and Elections. I wonder about what happens next here. We're talking about a campaign that's going to be ramping up almost simultaneously with the November campaign, with the city council races and whatever else. This is going to be a very busy time in the political sphere of Seattle right now, as these multiple campaigns are going to be flying at us.
Yeah, and it's a smaller scale.
True,
because it's just District 3. Right. Most of the city is not going to get inundated with Sawant recall mailers on either side. But I given what we've seen so far from both sides about putting posters up on telephone poles and putting yard signs in, and that
or tearing down the opposite
and tearing down
stuff.
It is going to be inescapable on the streets of Capitol Hill over the next couple of months.
That's going to be something to watch for. So that mail-in ballot, if you live in D3, it'll be mailed out to you on November 17th. Keep an eye out for that. Again, that election date for that special election regarding the recall Kshama Sawant issue, it's going to be happening on December 7th. All right. This is what we've all been waiting for, Kevin. The deep dive on the budget. I know you're ready. Hold your breath. We're taking a deep dive here, my friend. Mayor Durkin's budget proposal. I know you've been writing about this a ton. You've been trying to digest these, not millions, but hundreds of pages of the budget over the past several days here. Some overall takeaways from it here about this $7.1 billion package?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a more difficult budget for the city council to sort of get angry at the mayor for than last year's.
I was wondering where you were going with
a
that.
A lot of their pet issues and pet peeves, she actually funded.
Right.
There's almost $200 million for for building more affordable housing in there. There's a lot of stuff in there. There's some pretty aggressive funding for alternatives to public safety, alternatives to policing in there, including programs that were really one-offs right now, the participatory budgeting and the Equitable Communities Initiative. She put in basically full funding to turn those into not just full funding for next year, but she found sort of continuing sources of revenues to fund both of them. So it won't just be for 2022, it can be for 2023 and beyond, right? So they're not just one-offs, as well as $10 million of continuing funding for the capacity building RFP funding that went out just within the last month or so. Big change is Regional Homeless Authority.
I was going to, passing over dollars to them.
A huge amount of responsibility.
More than $100 million too. Yeah.
104. And it's interesting because that's more than the contract with the Regional Homeless Authority that Seattle has required. Right. It's probably about $24 million. I think they were supposed to put in about 90 million. And so they put in more.
Big.
I mean, there's going to be, and that's interesting because, we've had this ongoing rift between the city council and the mayor over investing and building out quickly tiny home villages, right? And is the mayor dragging her feet on it? Is it just taking a long time because of all logistical and legal and zoning issues around that?
Right.
And now that conversation shifts to be one between the city council and the Regional Homeless Authority.
That's right.
And by the way, Mark Donis, who runs the Regional Homeless Authority, is not terribly keen on tiny home villages and building out a lot of them. So that is going to be an issue, but it's not really a rift between the mayor and the city council. Right.
It's that
has shifted. So that there are two big. There were two big revenue sources in this budget that a bunch of decisions need to be made about. One is tranche 2 of the ARPA, the federal ARPA
funding from COVID.
And the city council has not said anything yet about how that money should be spent. And then the second part, second big, and that's about 160 million. The second one is about 235 million of payroll tax funding. And there the city council has actually said, here is our resolution and our specific formula for how that money should be spent. And the mayor and city budget office did something interesting here. Which is they recognize, so they did the math. They figured, we're going to need to put this much money into each of these different buckets to meet the requirements of the payroll tax sort of spending plan the city council wrote. But sort of a general principle of the way you do sort of expense budgeting is first you spend, of all the different sources of money you have, first you spend the money that has the most restrictions on it. And you work your way out to the money that has the least restrictions on it. And that way you maximize your flexibility for the options for things that you can fund with the money that you've got left.
That makes sense.
So the federal ARPA funding had more restrictions on it. And they were external restrictions. There are restrictions on the payroll tax funding, but only because the city council put those restrictions on it. If they hadn't done that, it'd be general fund money. They could spend on anything they want. So what the mayor and city budget office did was they looked at the buckets within the payroll tax spending plan, filled them as much as they could with ARPA restricted ARPA
I
funding
see.
first,
Okay.
and then topped them off with payroll tax to get them up to
see.
the point that was required
I
in,
see, by the
in the
council.
payroll
Yeah.
tax spending plan. And
Yeah.
that left a bunch of the payroll tax funding unspent.
I see.
And the mayor said, okay, we're going to spend these on other
Right.
priorities for the city council, like some of
So-
the things we talked about already.
Yeah, so it's not that she's saying these priorities from the council aren't important. She's just using a different bucket of money to fill them up, and then taking that jumpstart money and trying to put it in other places.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the council members are going to have to figure out how they feel about this.
Yeah.
Councilmember Mosqueda has already come out and said, well, this was all the payroll tax money was supposed to be additive. And
Right.
I'm not sure this really makes it additive or not.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's, it's hard to tell with the city council members how much of that is just posturing and trying to sort of take digs at the mayor for political points, or
Teresa
especially
Mosqueda
because
happens to be running for election.
happens to be running
re-election.
for.
Yeah, right.
And how much of it is, a serious concern about that. And we'll see how that plays out over the coming weeks. At the end of the day, the city council gets the final say. If they do want to redirect that payroll tax money back into sort of all the buckets and make it all additive, they're going to have to cut some other things. And that's going to be some tough choices.
Right. Can I jump in on another piece here? Because I saw a few headlines about this idea of increasing the number of officers on the SPD. The mayor's talking about this, adding 125 cops. But when you talk about the expected attrition, at least, when you talk about that, a net increase of 35 officers, I know we're going to see some pushback on this.
Right. So, let's put this in general terms. Every organization, whether it's a business, whether it's a city department, whether it's anything, every organization has attrition over the course of the year. Right.
Yep.
So if you're not always hiring, then because you're going to have attrition, your headcount is going to go down over the course of the year. Right. So even if we wanted SPD not to grow, they're still going to have to do hiring this year. Right. And SPD's hiring pipeline is really long because there's so much sort of testing and training that all goes into it that they basically already, their pipeline for next year, the number of hires they're going to be able to do in 2022 is already a known quantity because they know how many people they already have in the pipeline. And it's about 125. So what the SPD has said is our plan is to hire 125 people next year. And our expectation for attrition is going to be about 90 people. So there's going to be a net plus of about 35, which if that really happens, then that's lower attrition they've seen this year, and it's higher hiring than they've seen this year. So there's a lot of ifs about that. But if they were actually to manage to pull that off, that would still put them considerably below where they expected to be originally by the end of 2021.
Right. Yeah, because I think I saw 1,343 officers funded in the 2021 budget, and now this is looking like it would end up at about 1,230. So, I mean, we are talking about fewer officers potentially at the end of the day, even with this ad that the mayor's talking about.
Right. So, there's certainly advocates out there that, want to see SPD continue to shrink.
Yes.
And they're not going to be happy with this.
Yes.
And the city council, they had last week their first sort of discussion on that.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of sort of questions asking about kind of the details of it, but there was no real pushback yet on them trying to hire that many people. And I think it's because there are a lot of residents of the city who really pushed back on sort of the cuts to SPD given the increase in crime and the
gun
public
violence.
safety
and we've
issues in
got,
the city right now.
kids at
and gun
Judkins
violence.
Park needing to have an evacuation plan from football practice because of shots fired there in the afternoon. It's some serious stuff happening.
So I think they're being sensitive to that. But one of the things that plays into this considerably, it would be tough for the mayor and SPD to make this to say this and put that plan out there if they weren't investing very heavily in the 2022 budget in alternatives to policing.
Agreed.
Right? And there's a lot of money going into that, and there's a lot of
and
effort
the mayor
and
has said too, it doesn't have to be an either or type of a thing, and I think that's an important message to get across. That there's some investments being made on either side here.
And the mayor has said also, not just either or, but let's stand up the alternatives before we start shrinking SPD more. Again, there are advocates out there that disagree with that want to see more aggressive downsizing of SPD right now. And those policy arguments are going to be playing out over the next couple months while the city council works on this 2022 budget.
Boy, this is going to be so interesting to check out here. We're going to continue the budget chatter, actually. How do you get involved and put your 2 cents in on this $7.1 billion? That's coming up on What's Next. Well, Kevin, I wanted to make sure we touched on how people can be involved in the budget process. You talk about this a lot. We've got that first public hearing October 12th at 5:30 in the evening. You'll see it on Seattle Channel. You can sign up 2 hours beforehand to submit public comment. I just want to talk about how people can stay engaged in this process, because it's kind of a sprint marathon combo, if you will, because there's a lot happening over the next couple of months here, but there's a lot to take in too. So your thoughts about this, keeping people engaged with this?
Well, so, first I'm going to put in a plug. Omari and I, have been doing this whole budget school season. If you haven't seen budget school, you should go watch those and hopefully learn a little bit about how this works. And Omari are going to continue that through the budget process over the next 2 months. So as various events happen, we will be reporting out on that. This coming week, this coming week is going to be a quiet week, right? Yeah. We recorded an episode last week after the mayor's budget came out, talking about a bunch of things that are in there. This coming week is quiet while the city council and their staff put together their consolidated list of issues on each area of the mayor's budget. And then next week, as you mentioned, we've got a public hearing on October 12th. And then the following 3 days, the 13th through the 15th, the city council will be having another set of meetings to discuss their consolidated list of issues. So So next week is really going to pick up again, and Omari will be back in there to talking about that, recording another episode, so we can kind of give you the highlights of what happens with where it looks like the city council is going to go with all that. Now, the public hearing is an interesting thing. As Omari and I talked about in budget school, there's lots of different ways to get involved. And you really need to be, how you choose your way to get involved. You need to think about whether it's proportional to what you're trying to achieve. If you want to register your support for an idea or your opposition to an idea, public hearing is a great way to do that, right? If you want to get more money in for something, spending 2 minutes in a public hearing saying something is not going to be enough to get that done. Right? So you should be reaching out to your the 3 city council members that represent you. You should be, maybe even talking to folks in the city department to make sure that you've really got the math right. You know what it would cost to do the thing that you want to do. See if there's any overlapping efforts. Think hard about which of the city council members, not just your district representatives, are going to be interested. If you want to do sort of a transportation thing, well, Councilmember,
talk to Peterson.
You got to talk to Councilmember Peterson about that. If you want to talk to parks, something related to parks,
those committees, right?
Then it's Councilmember Juarez. So think about the committees and what each councilmember, what domains they're responsible for oversight of, because they're absolutely going to be involved in those conversations, not just the districts that they affect.
Very, very good advice. Thank you for breaking that down, Kevin. All right, well, it's time to wrap up the show. And as we do, we like to bring in a treat and talk about it. And I always like to break these down with Kevin and test his knowledge on these things. So, Kevin, once again, it's chocolate chip cookies in our house. And you can just see how thick. So my daughter makes these, and she calls them dumb thick boys. It's kind of a silly name, but it's like, it is dumb just how thick this thing is. It's a thick cookie. And I wanted to ask you, here's a quiz question for you here.
First, is that a reference to you and me?
Probably so. I mean, I'm a lot thicker than you, man. But
little could have sticking the knife in you and me.
Probably so. That's what teenagers do. But just did a little research on this one, Kevin. So think of a nationwide poll here. What's the breakdown between who prefers a crispy chocolate chip cookie versus a chewy chocolate chip cookie? Any idea on those numbers there? You got a wild guess.
I have no idea. What are you? What's your preference?
I'm a chewy guy, and as it turns out, I'm in the majority, and this is according to Rachel Ray, who knows just about everything. 65% of America says chewy is where it's at. 35% is saying crispy. So that's what I got for you. That's what the people are saying.
A lot of crispy versus chewy often comes down to do you like to dunk it or not?
Yeah. Good point.
A lot of people like to dunk cookies, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not chocolate chip cookie. Chocolate chip cookies are great for dunking in hot chocolate.
Yeah. Right? Okay.
Maybe not coffee or tea so much.
For the Dairy Foundation there, but yeah, you can do whatever you want to do with that if you're dunking it. Yeah, right. If you're dunking it, if you're just chewing it, have a good time. Whatever you do with it. Kevin, thank you so much for breaking this down for me, and we'll keep things crispy here or chewy, I
Crispy
guess,
as
as long
always.
as we can.
Crispy.
Yeah.
It's going to be a crispy couple months. Yeah.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Thank you, sir. Thanks also to our patrons and everybody who's listening. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you might listen. Again, please do become a patron on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We could definitely use your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media, and we will see you soon.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.